Okay, and now we're doing the last keynote session before the coffee break, and we have none other than Ravi Gururaj coming back with someone very interesting and illuminating, Ashish Kotari, who's now with LinkedIn, runs the Bangalore office. So please welcome Ravi and Ashish.
So,
it's a tough act to follow.
No. You're a very different story and a very interesting one, Akshay. So we met a couple of months ago at your office, and we were chatting, and I invited Akshay to come out and talk to us about his product story. And in some sense, you're a product guy from the very beginning. Maybe we'll start there. You were at Stanford at the D School. Tell us a little bit about what you were doing there and what got you to build your first startup, right?
Awesome. Well, first of all, thanks for having me. It's such an honor to be here. I went to Stanford from 2008 to 2010 to do my master's in electrical engineering. And I think that was really a transformational experience for me, partly because of a lot of the courses I took at the design school, which all happened by chance. And so I'll tell you a little story in terms of how that's had an impact on my life. So in my first quarter at Stanford, I was taking a machine learning course with Professor Andrew Ng, which felt a lot more natural to me, like being in labs and solving problems and coding up and all of that. But along with that course, I also took this other course, which was called the Design Thinking Bootcamp. This was offered at the Institute of Design, which is also called the D School. And I clearly remember the first exercise we did, and I really felt out of place, was to redesign how people eat ramen noodles.
Ramen noodles.
And as an electrical engineering student, I felt a little bit out of place. I felt maybe I'm in the wrong class. But I thought, let me at least give it another week or so because I could potentially change if I don't like it. And so as part of the exercise, they asked us to go on the field and just talk to people and experience people eating ramen noodles. And so we went to a restaurant called Maruichi in Mountain View. And I was with a few other colleagues, a few of the students who were taking this course. And we literally looked at people and stared at them eating ramen noodles and just to try to observe and see if there's anything that was wrong about that experience, which also felt kind of really so different as an electrical engineering student. We also went to some Japanese supermarkets and we interviewed people buying ramen noodles and understanding what they liked. And the more I did this, the more I realized that I was really kind of gaining interesting insights. Like some people like their noodles really long, some people like it short, some people like more soup in it, some people don't like as much soup in it. Some people are eating noodles on the go, some people are eating noodles as like a late night snack. And there were all these interesting insights, all these interesting ideas that came, and then we actually went back and built prototypes based on those insights, based on that empathy that we had generated. And so that was one of many exercises we did at the design school. And I think the change that I saw before that and after that is I think all my ideas and all the kind of startup opportunities that I would think in my head were always tech-driven in the sense that it was always like, oh, wouldn't it be nice if we used this API and this new technology or this new platform and did something like that. Whereas after that experience and after doing a few of these at the design school, I think a lot of the ideas were all empathy-driven, all problems-driven, being out in the field and really seeing what people are going through and seeing what problems they have, and then leveraging technology to solve them. And so that, I think, it really changed my life.
So starting from the customer in some sense, starting from the use cases.
Correct.
So great. So, how do you end up at the idea you had in school, which is the news aggregating site Pulse? Tell us a little bit about that and what the underlying thesis there was.
Yeah, so every quarter at Stanford, I was trying to do something that could potentially become a company because I was trying to kind of live the dream of Silicon Valley. And so in the first five quarters, I tried many things that didn't work out. Fortunately, in the sixth quarter, my co-founder Ankit and I started this app called Pulse. And very similar to the ramen example, I think it was started because it was born out of our own personal frustration that it was increasingly hard to read news on the phone. And that's where all the people around us at Stanford were doing. And so a few insights we had was that increasingly all the consumption on mobile, this is back in 2010, was happening on mobile devices. And then the other insight we had was that increasingly the news you get, actually you get from a variety of different sources. So it wasn't that you would read the morning newspaper and that was it. And it wasn't that you would see the evening news and that was the only thing you'd see. I think basically we live in a world where you go in and out of news every hour. Anything that's breaking, like you're always kind of quickly getting a snack of news. And it was actually, back in 2010, it was actually pretty hard because the phones were not as powerful, the networks were not that great, even in Palo Alto. And the publisher sites would take a long time because they were not optimized for mobile. So even something like New York Times would take 15 seconds to load, which was painful. And so the simple idea was like, can we actually build a simple app that would take all your favorite publishers, put it into an app that is available offline, that instantly loads, and we literally hacked it together. I think from an idea to being in the App Store was 6 weeks. And so it was a class project that we just put it out there. It was never meant to be a company, but it kind of took its own path.
So what was the path initially? I mean, the first few weeks, first few months, tell us a little bit about that. Because we have a lot of entrepreneurs thinking mobile in India now, right?
Yeah.
And I think there's lots of opportunity because that's actually the medium that's going to be the most prevalent and growing clearly the most, right?
Yeah.
So I think a lot of these lessons that you have are very relevant here. So inspire us a little bit about the little bit of meteoric growth you all saw then, pretty organic, right?
It was very organic. We launched it initially as an iPad app because that was a new device that had just launched. And I think increasingly more and more people were using iPad as a way to consume media. And I think when we launched it, this was week 7 of the class, we instantly saw a lot of people really liking the design of the app. It was very visual. It was very efficient to read news. It was very fast. And one of the things that we did by mistake, not by mistake, but by chance, was kind of a blessing in disguise, was on the main screen of the app, we had this heart sign on the top right. And most people clicked on that thinking that they're saying that they like the app or something like that. But as soon as you click on that heart sign, we would literally open up an email box with a subject line, feedback for Pulse. And so literally, we were getting hundreds of people who were buying the app who would write these long emails to us about things they liked about the app, things they didn't like about the app. And Ankit and I were literally in class, reading emails every minute about all we were getting an instant view of how people were liking the app.
So you were still in class at that time, right?
We were still in class.
Did you have a big team or just
It's just Ankit and I.
Okay, just the two of you guys.
So we kept improving the product. We launched 2 more updates. We improved the design significantly. The original design was done by myself, which was actually pretty bad. So we actually got a real designer who cleaned up our visual design. Week 9 is when we got covered by the New York Times, which really took us to the top of the App Store. This is all
crashed that day, or
no? Okay. So interestingly, Pulse, when it first launched, did not have a backend, so it was infinitely scalable. Because the client was actually going out, retrieving the RSS feeds, doing all the work, and then week 10, this was the week before the graduation. This was Worldwide Developer Conference in 2010. Steve Jobs was going to announce the iPhone 4. And before he announces the iPhone 4, he says, by the way, there's some amazing apps that have come on the iPad. Let me show you a few of them. And I clearly remember Ankit and I were in our dorm rooms, watching this keynote. And the first app he talked about was Pulse. And we literally fell off our chair. And I think that day is probably the day suddenly our class project had become a company.
Got it. No, that's excellent. Now tell us a little bit about, you went out and raised some funds, or were you just bootstrapping it all the way?
So initially, we actually launched Pulse as a paid app. So it was $4 for the app.
That's a pretty hefty price, right?
Yeah.
As apps come along.
And I'm so glad we did that because we were able to sell about 200,000 copies of the app. And so in some ways, we were able to raise our seed round through that. It also gave us enough time. It was almost like a beta because it was a paid app. Not too many people were coming on board. So we were able to build our backend. We were able to really get all publishers on board. And then 6 months later, we actually made it free because we felt like we could really get the masses to use the app and really get the data around what people are reading and how do we get better at recommending content. And so I think 6 weeks later, we had also raised a small round. Eventually, we ended up raising about $10 million in our Series A, which helped us grow to about 30 million users before we were acquired by LinkedIn.
Got it. Now, so tell us a little bit about the acquisition. You know, it was for what? Is it public? And
It's close to about 100 million.
100 million, right? Perfect. And how long was the company in? You were in it how many months at that point?
3 years in.
3 years. Very good. And then how big was the company at that point?
It's about 25 people.
Yeah, so it's a small company, 100 million exit, pretty damn good, right? I think that's a really good outcome, I think. Now, tell us a little bit about what the thinking there was. Were you tempted to go for it, keep going? I mean, LinkedIn comes along and makes this amazing offer. It's just the two of you, haven't diluted much. You can't, I'm sure you weighed the options, right? Tell us a little bit about that.
So I think there were a couple reasons for why we did it. I think one was that we originally started with the idea that Pulse was really designed for bringing all your publishers in one place and really having you an instant experience of reading news. In 2013, 3 years later, that problem was less of a problem, partly because publishers actually had mobile optimized websites, partly because our phones had gotten a lot more powerful, the networks had gotten a lot better. And so the problem we saw in 2013 was not about being able to quickly read an article. The problem was there's 1 million articles being written every day. Tell me which are the articles that I should be reading. Tell me all the news that I really need to read today before I go to work. And we tried a bunch of different ways to actually solve that in terms of really kind of looking at collaborative filtering and figuring out, if you like this article, what are some of the other ones that you may want to read. And it turns out that, that data is not that good enough. I think content recommendations based on what you've read is probably not going to be as useful as content recommendations based on who you are and who you know and where did you study and where do you work and which industry you're in. And although we had 30 million users using the product, we didn't know all of that identity data. And so at 2013, we were at a crossroads where we could either potentially raise a Series B or potentially join hands with LinkedIn. And with LinkedIn, actually, our conversations were just so aligned because Pulse was at a company which actually had partnerships with all the publishers, but didn't have identity. And LinkedIn actually had deep identity data, but was wanting to get deeper into content. So it was actually a perfect fit. And so from a first phone call to actually the term sheet signing was about 4 days over the weekend.
Nice.
And so it was just like a perfect fit for both sides.
That's an express deal, I must say.
Yeah.
Now, tell me, when we chatted in your office, you told me, I was a lousy manager when I was managing 25 people. Now I'm managing 1,000 easily in Bangalore, right? I've been to your office. It's a beautiful 250,000 square feet facility. I think, probably the best I've seen in Bangalore. And you have 1,000 really high value engineers building product out of India, right? Yep. At this point. So what did you learn in that transition over, the last 3 years since the acquisition, right?
So I'd say it's not easy, but it's easier than 25. Right. So I think the biggest learning for me the last 3 years as being part of LinkedIn has been really, it's been a crash course in learning how to scale myself up. I think one of the things I didn't do well because it was my first company, first time I ever worked somewhere at Pulse, was that we ended up hiring 25 amazing individual contributors, but we didn't hire enough managers to really think about career growth and all of that. And so 3 years later, right around the acquisition, it got to a point where instead of being the product person or instead of being the CEO of the company, I was effectively just an HR guy. And I didn't enjoy that. And part of it was because I didn't grow the company in a way where I could scale myself up. Now, at LinkedIn, once we got acquired, I really got to see the team grow from 25 to almost 100. And I was part of the processes LinkedIn has put in place. I also got to see very closely how Jeff runs the company and the investment he's made in really codifying the mission and vision of the company, really codifying the culture and values that we stand for. And he really reinforces that every day. And so to me, as a founder of Pulse, I always thought the mission vision is a little bit fluff, may not be needed, it's something that you just put in a deck or on your wall. I think LinkedIn is such a mission-driven company. It doesn't even need to be on the walls because people feel it and actually act based on those values we have. And I've already got to see that how effective that becomes in good times and in bad times, right? And so I think that's been, I mean, I'm really grateful that I've had that opportunity. And, you know, and I think the other thing I've learned is that also investing in leaders, giving them full independence to run it, and kind of really figure out how to make them accountable as well. So I think it's been, you know, just an amazing learning to a point where, you know, LinkedIn India is about 1,000 people, and I don't feel as stressed, or I don't feel as kind of, you know, in some ways lost as I felt when I was running Pulse.
Oh, that's a great paradox, isn't it? But now tell us a little bit about, I know you met with the Prime Minister when Jeff was here a couple of weeks ago, right? Or a few weeks ago. And there was a meeting at his home, I think. So tell us a little bit about what you discussed there. You know, he uses LinkedIn, right?
He uses LinkedIn very effectively.
Okay.
It was a great meeting. It was the first time I met him, and you know, I think initially the meeting was supposed to be about a 30-minute just introducing ourselves, telling him a little bit about what LinkedIn is doing, and also how closely aligned our goals are. You know, I think for LinkedIn, the vision is to create economic opportunity for every professional in the workforce, and it's so aligned with what the government is trying to do in terms of jobs creation and so on. And so it started off with that, but, you know, fortunately, it so happened that I think Monday was supposed to be Eid, and I think Eid shifted to Tuesday. And so instead of meeting at his office, we actually met at his residence. And it may have, you know, he may have had a little bit more time than he usually would have had for us. So we ended up actually chatting for an hour. And it was like brainstorming all the different ways that you know, and so he literally went on and on talking about all the problems that he's seeing. You know, everything from, you know, figuring out how to get nurses in India get jobs around the world. How do you get retired professors around the world to come to India and teach? How do you get rural entrepreneurs, give a platform so that they can, you know, raise money and actually build businesses? How do you make sure that all the colleges and companies are accredited so that people are not getting scammed in India? And we went on, and I think, you know, there's some amazing work we can do together based on some of the data we have as well. So to me, it was probably one of the career highlights that I would put right next to, you know, meeting Steve Jobs earlier in Pulse's journey.
Very cool. So now, in terms of, you're now building in India, for India, right, in many ways. So give us a little bit of that in terms of what you're experiencing, how building for India is different than building for the LinkedIn user in the US, right? What are the insights you've gained over the last couple of years?
So I'm fairly new here. I'm in the process of relearning my own country because I've been away for 13 years. But I've been here 9 months.
How old are you? You're just 16, right?
I just turned 30.
Yeah, very good.
But you know, I think one of the biggest problems the country faces today is really making sure that our new generation are getting the right skills to be employable in the future. Especially the future is changing so quickly in terms of, you know, all the stuff that's happening with automation. And so, you know, one of the things I did was when I moved here, I adapted the same techniques that D-School taught me. So I actually went on the field, and we went to Nashik, Meerut, Durgapur, and Devangere, all different corners of India, to meet students in tier 2, tier 3 colleges, and really understand like how they live, you know, what got them to that college, how they get their first job, and really see how LinkedIn can help play a role there. And one of the things I realized was that, you know, the situation is actually pretty dire. Like, I think the stuff that we read about in newspapers is, you know, some guy at IIT made a 2 crore salary and so on. I think if you go to like most tier 2, tier 3 colleges, they don't have a placements process. They don't have a placements officer really helping kids actually get a job. And if you read some of the studies, it's actually like, you know, pretty disappointing, right? I think India is graduating 8 to 10 million people every year, and more than half of them are unemployable. Not unemployed, they're unemployable because they don't have the skills. And so I think that's the role that LinkedIn can play here. And so we just launched a new product 6 weeks ago called placements.com. And it's a really simple product. And the idea is that any college kid, whether they're at the IIT or whether they're in the interior parts of Bihar or Assam or wherever they are, as long as they have access to a computer, they can take a standardized test on this new platform. And that test connects them to thousands of openings directly. Some of the best jobs with Amazon, Samsung, HCL are on that platform. And just in 6 weeks, we've gotten over 1 million applications to that platform. And so I think I'm pretty excited about that. I think to your point about insights, I think it is a really interesting time in India. I think a lot of people have, smartphones and are finally having connected to data. Some of the really interesting insights for me has been like, I think even in a city like Bangalore, the connectivity just drops. And so you need to make a product that works on 2G. Like even if people have 4G connections, like our connection drops, and so your product better works on 2G, which is why we launched LinkedIn Lite as well. The other thing is
something you drove out of here, right?
Yep,
across
completely
the world.
built here.
I think you're planning to even roll it out around the world.
Exactly. Actually, LinkedIn Lite is a great example of the amazing talent that exists in India. So LinkedIn Lite was basically rebuilding entire LinkedIn.com for the mobile web, which is a pretty ambitious project. That was done by 6 engineers in Bangalore in 12 weeks.
Nice. Very nice. Very nice.
And I really think that's going to be the first product that LinkedIn has made here that is actually going to be just become the default product around the world.
And that might be the first mobile product out of India that hits 1 billion people or whatever, right?
I hope so.
How many does Pulse touch today?
So Pulse, which actually started as a class project, now powers over 450 million people's homepage on LinkedIn.
Nice, very nice. Yeah. Hey, thank you, Akshay, for coming in. I think we're going to see a lot of you. I'm guessing over the years. You're just getting started in this journey. Thank you very much for coming into NPC.
Thank you, Ravi.